Hello everyone, and welcome to the channel. I'm DarkCaseX. The air disaster we are examining today is extremely complex, involving several countries. An Air India flight, while flying over the Atlantic Ocean at 31,000 feet, suddenly disappeared from radar without any warning. After a search, it was eventually confirmed the plane disintegrated in mid-air and crashed into the sea, sinking 2,000 meters to the ocean floor. All 329 people on board were killed. This is the most severe air disaster in Air India's history. At the same time, it is also Canada's most serious terrorist attack. The Canadian authorities spent 20 years and 130 million Canadian dollars investigating, which also makes it the most expensive case in Canadian history. So what exactly happened that year? Let's travel back to 1985 and take you through the causes and consequences of this air disaster. Air India, as India's largest international airline, has a long history tracing its origins back to 1932. It developed rapidly in the 1950s and expanded its international routes. In 1975, Air India introduced the Boeing 747 and simultaneously adopted the Palace in the Sky livery. This involved painting each passenger window to resemble a red palace or pavilion, symbolizing that every passenger was in a royal palace. On June 23, 1985, at Canada's Montreal Mirabel International Airport, a large Boeing 747 passenger jet was undergoing boarding procedures. This was one of Boeing's large, long-range, wide-body aircraft. Its four-engine design and massive passenger capacity made it a very popular model for long-haul flights at the time. Playing at the airport was Air India Flight 182, a Boeing 747-237B model. Its registration number was VTEFO. It had also been named Kanishka. This was the name of an Indian emperor. The aircraft was delivered to Air India in July 1978. Having only flown for 7 years, it was in excellent condition. Flight 182 was a regular international flight operated by Air India. The departure point was Toronto, Canada, with stops in Montreal, Canada, London Heathrow, and New Delhi, India, before reaching its final destination in Mumbai, India. Due to the long route, the flight from Toronto to Montreal was designated as Flight 181. From Montreal onwards, the flight number changed to Flight 182. For ease of narration, we will hereafter refer to this aircraft as Flight 182. The plane, after its stop at Montreal's Mirabel Airport, was to depart for its next stop, London Heathrow Airport. The crew for this leg of the journey included the 57-year-old captain, Hans Singh Narendra. He was a veteran pilot who had worked for Air India for 30 years. It is said he loved flying very much, taking only one sick day in 30 years. He was truly dedicated. The co-pilot was 41-year-old Satwinder Singh Bhinder. He was also an experienced captain, but on this flight, he was serving as co-pilot. The flight engineer was 57-year-old Dara D. Dumasia, who was equally experienced. In addition to these three, there were 19 cabin crew members and 307 passengers. There were a total of 329 people on board. Among them, 268 were Canadian citizens. There were over 80. Boarding complete, the plane took off smoothly and headed east. According to the plan, the plane had to cross the Atlantic Ocean to reach London. The flight time was over 6 hours. Since it was a night flight, many passengers began to rest after boarding. The cabin was very quiet. At 5 a.m., Flight 182 was already flying over the North Atlantic. This vast expanse of ocean is located between Canada and Ireland. Therefore, these two countries were responsible for most of the airspace management. Near the Canadian side, it was handled by Canadian air traffic controllers. As it neared Ireland, it was handed over to Irish air traffic controllers. After some time flying, Flight 182 left the airspace managed by Canadian ATC and began communicating with ATC at Shannon Airport, Ireland. At this time, everything was normal. At 7:10 a.m., the air traffic controller instructed Flight 182 to continue maintaining an altitude of 31,000 feet and proceed towards London. As time went on, the radar showed information for 3 aircraft simultaneously. The other 2 were flights from Trans World Airlines and Canadian Pacific Airlines. The 3 planes slowly began to overlap on the radar screen because these 3 aircraft were flying at different altitudes, and their flight paths were roughly the same. The Canadian Pacific aircraft was flying at an altitude of 37,000 feet. Then there was the Trans World Airlines plane flying at an altitude of 35,000 feet. Finally, Flight 182 was at an altitude of 31,000 feet. When their identification tags overlapped on the radar, the controller couldn't distinguish between the three planes. However, this wasn't a major issue. It had happened before. They would naturally separate as they flew. But unexpectedly, when the controller zoomed in, only 2 aircraft signals remained on the radar. Flight 182's signal had mysteriously vanished. The controller immediately tried to call Flight 182 on the radio, but there was no response. After several unsuccessful calls, controller realized something was wrong. He immediately reported that Flight 182 had lost contact. At 7:30 a.m., the Irish authorities decided to dispatch search teams. The plane's signal was last seen about 190 kilometers southwest of Cork. This was the vast Atlantic Ocean. The Irish side dispatched helicopters and coordinated with nearby ships to search. But the sea surface was empty. Nothing unusual was found. It wasn't until 2 hours later that a Canadian cargo ship on the sea discovered multiple pieces of floating wreckage. One piece clearly indicated it was aircraft debris, and it looked very similar to the Air India logo. Only then did people have to accept the fact that the plane had crashed. After confirming the crash, an investigation team was quickly assembled, considering the aircraft was Indian, but most passengers were Canadian. And the crash site was near Ireland and the UK. Therefore, India, Canada, the UK, Ireland, and other countries participated in the investigation, proceeding on multiple fronts simultaneously. The Irish side dispatched search teams to the crash site for rescue operations. However, all they could find was some floating debris and the bodies of the victims. No survivors were found. Because the disaster occurred at sea, the wreckage had sunk to the seabed. Moreover, before the incident, the crew of Flight 182 had not sent any distress signals. This posed a huge challenge to the investigation. The sea where the plane sank was 2,000 meters deep. Salvage operations at this depth are extremely difficult. The investigation team decided to first examine the recovered victims' bodies to see if they could find the cause of the crash from them. The victims' bodies were sent to the nearest city, Cork, in southern Ireland, for examination. In the first 4 days, 132 victims' bodies were recovered. After autopsies, the forensic department made a major discovery. Of the 132 victims, only 3 could be confirmed to have died from drowning. The rest had already died before hitting the water. 21 victims were found with almost no clothing. Additionally, the clothes on their bodies were mostly torn. Some victims also showed signs of injuries. All this indicated that the plane had disintegrated in mid-air. A large number of passengers were ejected from the plane, and the decompression caused their deaths. Finally, their bodies fell into the sea. However, this was just speculation at the time. What exactly happened to the plane? And how did it disintegrate? These answers still lay dormant at the bottom of the Atlantic. And salvaging the aircraft wreckage could not be completed in a short time. It was a long-term job. Another investigation team, through surveillance footage, also made a major discovery when Flight 182 was on its final flight. It actually had 5 engines. This was clearly abnormal. A normal Boeing 747 has a 4-engine design. If there was an extra engine, and the left-right thrust wasn't balanced, the plane could easily fly off course, leading to tragedy. The investigators initially thought this might be the cause of the crash. However, upon investigation, it was found the extra engine was broken and not operational. It was being transported back to London for repairs. Moreover, the Boeing 747 was designed to be able to carry an extra engine under its wing. This was a normal procedure and not a violation. As long as the thrust was balanced, it wouldn't pose any danger to the aircraft. Flight 182 was delayed by over an hour, precisely to mount this broken engine. Although carrying a 5th engine under the wing was not a problem, the investigators made another discovery. Flight 182's rear cargo door had been removed before takeoff. The purpose was to load large engine parts. into the cargo hold. Could it be that the cargo door wasn't reinstalled properly, causing explosive decompression leading to the plane's disintegration crash? This was indeed possible. The Turkish Airlines Flight 981 crash I've covered before was caused by a cargo door not being properly locked, which led to a crash. But whether it was really the cargo door's fault, to find the truth, it still came back to the underwater aircraft wreckage. As everyone knows, after an air crash, the first thing to find is naturally the plane's black box. Although the crash site was in water 2,000 meters deep, making salvaging the entire plane extremely difficult. If it was just to salvage the black box, the operation would be much simpler. Moreover, after the black box enters the water, it emits a fixed frequency signal. So even in 2,000 meter deep water, as long as they salvaged according to the signal, it shouldn't be a big problem. A British ship equipped with advanced deep water sonar and a French ship with a remotely operated underwater vehicle were sent to the scene to retrieve the black box. But strangely, the team couldn't lock onto the 37.5 kHz signal emitted by the black box. The signals they found were either slightly higher or slightly lower, and the black box signal only lasts for 30 days. Once 30 days passed, finding it would be difficult. After 2 consecutive weeks of fruitless searching, the salvage team was under immense pressure. With no leads, a detailed manual for the black box provided a breakthrough. The data showed that if the black box was damaged, its frequency could very likely change, for example, rising to 42 kHz. This made the salvage team realize that the 42 kHz signal point they had previously ruled out might actually be the black box. And so the salvage vessels retargeted this signal. After multiple salvage attempts, Flight 182's black box finally surfaced. The investigation team carefully analyzed the contents of the flight data recorder. They found that before the accident, all flight parameters were normal. There were no errors or malfunctions. After listening to the cockpit voice, recorder's audio, they also found no abnormalities. Just before the incident, the captain and co-pilot were discussing issues related to their arrival at the destination. Their tones were calm, and they never mentioned any problems with the plane. Then, suddenly, the recording just cut off. What could be confirmed now was that the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder had suddenly stopped working, with almost no warning. This was very strange. You see, the recorders are powered by the engines. What could cause such rapid and catastrophic damage? May the engines stop instantly, giving the pilots no time to react? The first thing the investigators thought of was an explosion. But to confirm this explosion theory, they still had to rely on salvaging the plane. The plane disintegrated from an altitude of 31,000 feet. By the time it hit the sea surface, the debris field was already vast. Then it sank 2,000 meters to the seabed, drifting even further with the currents. After measurements, the plane's fragments were scattered on the seabed over a wide area about 16 kilometers long and 6 kilometers wide. Salvaging a single piece took several hours. Trying to recover all the fragments was almost impossible. It was also time-consuming, labor-intensive, and expensive. What to do? The team decided to first analyze the approximate location of the explosion, and then use deep-sea detectors to find the corresponding aircraft fragments. A targeted salvage would significantly reduce the workload. Based on the instantaneous power loss, it was guessed the explosion likely occurred near the front of the aircraft. As this was closest to the power bay, just as the underwater salvage work was proceeding systematically, an explosion incident in Japan provided an important clue to this air disaster. Before Flight 182's accident, at Tokyo's Narita International Airport, another explosion had occurred. On June 23rd at 6:19 a.m., Narita Airport baggage handlers were transferring luggage from Canadian Pacific Airlines Flight 003 to Air India Flight 301 when a suitcase suddenly exploded. 2 baggage handlers were killed instantly, and 4 others were injured. It is said that when the handler was moving the luggage, they used too much force, causing the bomb inside the suitcase to detonate prematurely. If this explosion hadn't been premature, then the bomb hidden in the suitcase would have been successfully loaded onto Air India Flight 301. It would have then exploded in mid-air, causing even more severe consequences. An explosion an Air India plane. Also arriving from Canada, this made the Flight 182 investigators sense a conspiracy. The Canadian side firmly believed the crash of Flight 182 was definitely not an accident, but an organized and premeditated crime. In fact, Canada's suspicions were well-founded and supported by evidence. The investigation team, while reviewing Flight 182's passenger list, discovered that a person named M. Singh did not board the plane, but his luggage did. Meanwhile, luggage that exploded at Japan's Narita airport belonged to a person named L. Singh. He was the same. The person didn't board, but the luggage did, and their names were similar. Through investigation, both were found to be false names. M. Singh and L. Singh were likely the same person. The investigation team began tracking this person named Singh. Singh checked in at Vancouver at 3:50 p.m. on June 22nd at Vancouver. He requested that a dark brown, new Samsonite suitcase be transferred via Canadian Pacific Airlines Flight 60 to Toronto, then be put on Air India Flight 181 to Montreal, and finally transferred to India on Flight 182. Operated by the same aircraft, because Singh's seats on the next two flights were unconfirmed, the staff refused to check his luggage. This was, in fact, standard procedure. What if your seat wasn't confirmed, you didn't board, but your luggage did? That would be a problem. Unexpectedly, this man Singh became enraged, cursing loudly at the staff. There were over 30 people lining up to check in, but Singh was relentless, holding up everyone behind him. After a standoff, the staff relented. They issued him seat 10B on Canadian Pacific Flight 60. On Canadian Pacific Flight 60, and checked his luggage. But the staff repeatedly stressed that upon arrival in Toronto, he must check in again with Air India. After check-in was complete, this dark brown suitcase was successfully loaded onto the plane, but strangely, Singh quietly slipped away and did not board the flight. As one can imagine, Singh also failed to appear for the subsequent connecting flights, but his luggage was successfully transferred onto Flight 182. Normally, at Toronto Pearson Airport, there were strict security screening procedures, but as luck would have it, the machine for checking luggage was broken that day. Staff had to use handheld explosive detectors to check each piece of luggage. The security supervisor, through a demonstration, told the staff that if it made a beep 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 sound, the luggage had a problem. But in practice, the suitcases made various different sounds. This caused the staff to miss it. And ultimately, they failed to detect the bomb-laden luggage. At this point in the investigation, it was almost certain that the dark brown Samsonite suitcase was used to conceal the bomb, the culprit that caused the plane crash. Meanwhile, the Japanese authorities in the explosion debris found tiny circuit board fragments. Through the circuit board, they confirmed the bomb was hidden inside a Sanyo brand radio. But this model of radio had been sold for several years, and some had even been resold multiple times. Trying to find the actual owner of each unit was like finding a needle in a haystack. At the same time, the underwater salvage work finally made progress. The outer metal skin near the plane's forward cargo hold showed many signs of being bent outwards from the inside. There were also small pitting holes caused by an explosion. This all proved that an explosion had indeed occurred inside the plane. The blast point was in the forward cargo hold, and the forward cargo hold's location is right next to the plane's forward power bay. A rapid explosion could instantly destroy the power bay, thus cutting off all electrical supply to the plane. This explained why the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder had suddenly stopped working. Now that the cause was known, the next step was to catch the culprits responsible for this tragedy and the masterminds behind it. As mentioned earlier, based on the explosion fragments found at Narita Airport, the investigators had determined the bomb was hidden inside a Sanyo brand radio. Only 2,000 units of this radio model were produced, and all were sold in Vancouver. The Canadian police dispatched at least 135 officers to investigate, door to door, the shops that sold this radio. They got lucky. Officers found a lead in the small town of Duncan, near Vancouver. The shop owner said that a few weeks prior, he sold the last radio to a man named Inderjit Singh Rayat. His name just happened to contain Singh. This was quite a coincidence. Upon investigation, Rayat was a Sikh from India, living in Duncan near Vancouver. He worked as an auto mechanic and electrician, and was very familiar with electronics and circuitry. After buying the radio, he had asked people in the community about methods for making explosives. He claimed he wanted to blow up a tree stump next to his house. Later, the police also found he had purchased timers, detonators, and other items from different stores. His purpose was self-evident. It was, of course, to build a time bomb. He had even conducted test explosions in a nearby forest. It was certain that Rayat did indeed build bombs, but currently there was no evidence proving the Flight 182 and Narita airport explosions were directly related to him. However, as the investigation deepened, the clues became clearer and clearer. Rayat was a member of Babur Khalsa. This is a Sikh militant organization aiming to establish an independent Sikh nation in India's Punjab state. The organization had planned multiple armed attacks, assassinations, and bombings. The founder was Talwinder Singh Mar. In 1970, he emigrated from India to the Vancouver area. He later planned multiple armed attacks targeting Indian interests. In 1984, the conflict between the organization and the Indian government escalated. They even publicly announced plans to blow up multiple Indian passenger jets. It was said they wanted to retaliate for the Indian government's attack on the Sikh holy site, the Golden Temple, during Operation Blue Star. In fact, the then Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was assassinated because of this incident. Air India had also strengthened its security measures to respond to the potential crisis. It's worth mentioning that a year earlier, in August 1984, a criminal named Gribdro told the police that Parmar wanted him to build a time bomb to be placed on an airplane. The payment was $200,000, but he refused. Gribdro stated, "Although I've done some bad things in the past and spent a lot of time in prison, I won't put a bomb on a plane." So I went to the police station. Unfortunately, Parmar, the suspected mastermind, although arrested by the police, due to insufficient evidence, he was released. He later fled back to India, and in 1992, he was killed in a shootout with Punjab police. As for Rayat, the bomb maker, the Canadian authorities never caught him. He was later arrested in the UK, and in 1989, he was extradited back to Vancouver. On May 10, 1991, Rayat, for the Narita airport bombing case, was sentenced to 10 years in prison. However, Rayat only admitted to building the bomb. He claimed he didn't know its specific purpose, so the alleged mastermind was dead, and the bomb maker was apprehended. But the Canadian investigation was not over, because this, the most serious terrorist attack in Canadian history, could not have been carried out by just one or two people. There had to be more participants. On October 27, 2000, 15 years after the air disaster, the Canadian police arrested two other members of Babur Khalsa, Ajaib Singh Bagri and Rapudaman Singh Malik, as there was evidence they participated in the bombing plot. Among them was a strong witness, Tara Singh Hayer. He said Bagri was involved in the bombing of Flight 182 because he was at the scene. But unfortunately, he was the target of two assassination attempts in 1988. Although he survived the first, he did not survive the second. With his death, his previous affidavit could no longer be used as evidence. Ultimately, after several years of investigation and trial, due to insufficient evidence, Bagri and Malik were both acquitted and released in 2005. Malik was later killed in an attack in July 2022. There was another suspect whose name included Singh, Hardyal Singh Johal. He was a follower of Parmar. When M. Singh booked the ticket, he left Johal's phone number. An airport baggage handler also saw him at the airport. It is said it was Johal who stored the suitcase containing the bomb in the basement of a Vancouver school. But he was not initially charged. When the police remembered him, he had already died in 2002. The cause of death is unknown. The final result is ironic in what is considered the worst air disaster in Air India's history, and also the most serious terrorist attack in Canadian history. In the end, only one person, Rayat, faced legal consequences, and even then, he was convicted for Narita airport bombing. As for the alleged mastermind of the entire event, Parmar, and the other suspects, they either died unnatural deaths or, due to insufficient evidence, escaped legal justice. In June 2001, just as Rayat's 10-year sentence ended, Canadian authorities arrested him again. This time, he was charged for his culpability in the Flight 182 incident. In February 2003, Rayat, for assisting in building the bomb that caused the crash of Flight 182, was prosecuted. He pleaded guilty to 1 count of manslaughter and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Although the sentence was short, this was not the end. During the trial of Bagri and Malik, he testified in court, but it was proven he was lying profusely. The judge at the time stated, Rayat was an unmitigated liar. His testimony was clearly fabricated, his purpose to minimize his culpability as much as possible. He also refused to disclose the most critical information. Therefore, in January 2011, Rayat was, again for perjury, sentenced to 9 years in prison. He was finally granted parole in 2016. The Canadian authorities began investigating when the disaster occurred in 1985. This investigation lasted for nearly 20 years. During this period, it cost 130 million Canadian dollars, making this air disaster the most expensive investigation in Canadian history. After the disaster, Canada and Ireland both built memorials to commemorate the victims. The then Canadian Prime Minister Paul Martin stated at a memorial event, "Make no mistake, the flight was Air India's, the crash was off the coast of Ireland." But this is a Canadian tragedy. On June 17, 2010, the Canadian government, after a lengthy inquiry, released the full investigation report. The report was over 4,000 pages long and gave a clear conclusion. It was the Canadian government, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and the Canadian Security Intelligence Service that made a series of errors which allowed the terrorists to find a loophole, ultimately leading to the tragedy. Why say this? Because before the Flight 182 disaster, the militant group Parmar belonged to had publicly declared they would blow up multiple Indian passenger jets and threatened the public not to fly on Air India. The criminal Gribdro, as early as August 1984, 10 months before the crash, had reported to the police and revealed Parmar wanted to build a time bomb and blow up a plane. Simultaneously, 3 months before the crash, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, CSIS, had put Parmar under surveillance and had also incidentally wiretapped the bomb maker Rayat. CSIS agents even witnessed Rayat testing a bomb. But in the end, nothing came of it. If the Canadian authorities had taken it seriously at the time and fully investigated the case, perhaps this tragedy could have been prevented. The Canadian government later admitted there were indeed shortcomings in security in other areas and issued a public apology. They even funded the Kanishka project to research and prevent terrorist activities. The Canadian government also provided compensation to the families of the Flight 182 victims. This was a voluntary ex gratia payment outside of insurance. The specific amount was not disclosed. After the crash, the British government, through repeated tests, tried to find a solution so that even if a bomb exploded in the luggage hold, it wouldn't cause the plane to disintegrate. They actually managed to test a method. That is, to create a cargo container with a very hard texture that could withstand a small bomb. But the corresponding cost was extremely high. Therefore, this improvement measure was not widely adopted. However, strengthening airport security was much cheaper. Major airports began to improve and strengthen security measures, such as using advanced X-ray machines that could clearly identify luggage risks and assigning dedicated staff to match luggage with passengers, etc. Looking back at this disaster, the most critical issue was the transfer of luggage. The owner of the luggage did not board, yet the luggage was able to be transferred. If this loophole was not closed, similar air disasters might happen again in the future. So after the crash, airports established stricter regulations and security measures. One of them was to ensure the passenger who checked the luggage had boarded before the plane could take off. But rules are rules. In reality, many improvement measures were still not strictly implemented years later. 3 years after the Air India 182 disaster, on December 21, 1988, another crash with a very similar plot occurred. This was the Lockerbie bombing, which we have discussed before. The terrorists also used a radio, also used a Samsonite suitcase. Also, the person did not board the plane. The suitcase got on the plane and then exploded, ultimately leading to 270 deaths. It must be said, the lesson learned from the sacrifice of Flight 182 was still not taken seriously enough. This is truly disheartening. Alright, that's all for today's story. If you enjoy my videos, you can like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of my videos. I'll see you next time.